Khun Sa, the Opium King of the Golden Triangle. The year is 1985. Deep in the impenetrable jungles of Southeast Asia, where the borders of Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos converge like three fingers of a deadly hand, lies a region that would become synonymous with death and addiction across the globe. They call it the Golden Triangle. Not because of precious metals, but because of something far more valuable and infinitely more dangerous. Here, endless fields of blood-red poppies sway in the mountain breeze, their innocent beauty masking a sinister purpose. These flowers would feed an international market of addiction, despair, and unimaginable profit. For over 3 decades, this remote corner of the world would pump more heroin into global veins than anywhere else on Earth. And at the center of this empire of poison stood one man. A man who didn't just control the drug trade. He was the drug trade. A man who commanded armies, negotiated with governments, and made the world's most powerful nations tremble. His name was Khun Sa. To his people, a revolutionary hero. To law enforcement worldwide, public enemy number 1. But to everyone who crossed his path, he was something far more terrifying. The undisputed Opium King of the Golden Triangle. Our story begins in 1934, in the rugged borderlands of Myanmar's Shan state. This wasn't just any corner of the world. It was a place where empires came to die, where ethnic minorities had fought for survival against overwhelming odds for centuries. Into this world of perpetual conflict was born a boy named Jung Kifu, though history would know him by his Shan name, Khun Sa. His father was Chinese, a shrewd trader who understood the ancient networks of commerce that crisscrossed these mountains. His mother was Shan, part of a proud warrior culture that had never truly bowed to any central authority. This dual heritage would prove crucial. From his Chinese father, young Khun Sa learned the art of negotiation, the importance of networks, and how to think 3 moves ahead. From his Shan mother, he inherited the warrior's code, the understanding that in these mountains, respect came only through strength. While other children attended school, Khun Sa received a different education entirely. He watched the ancient cycle of the poppy, how farmers planted the seeds in October, tended the plants through winter, and harvested the precious sap in spring. For generations, his people hadn't seen opium as a crime. It was medicine, currency, and survival all rolled into one sticky, brown resin. By his teens, Khun Sa had learned the jungle's most important lesson. In a world without law, survival meant control. And control meant power. Raw, undeniable power. In the 1950s, as Myanmar struggled with post-independence chaos, young Khun Sa formed his first militia. He gathered other Shan rebels, men tired of living under the boot of the Burmese army, tired of being treated as second-class citizens in their own homeland. At first, they fought for noble ideals: independence, self-determination, freedom from oppression. But Khun Sa's sharp mind saw beyond simple rebellion. He wasn't just interested in freedom, he was interested in empire. By his 20s, Khun Sa had already taken control of small opium caravans that moved through the mountain passes like ghost trains. But, unlike other smugglers, who scurried through shadows like rats, Khun Sa moved like a general preparing for war. His men wore matching uniforms. His caravans moved with military precision. His camps were fortified like army bases. This wasn't just smuggling. This was the birth of a narco-military state. And then came his stroke of genius, the move that would transform him from regional warlord to global kingpin. While other traffickers were content to sell raw opium sap to middlemen, Khun Sa decided to control the entire supply chain. Deep in the jungle, he built the first heroin processing laboratories Southeast Asia had ever seen. These weren't crude operations. Khun Sa imported chemists from Hong Kong, acquired industrial equipment, and established quality control that rivaled legitimate pharmaceutical companies. His heroin, stamped with the 999 brand that became infamous worldwide, was purer than anything law enforcement had encountered. By the late 1960s, Khun Sa's product was flooding the streets of Bangkok, Hong Kong, and Sydney. But his greatest market was yet to come. As American soldiers poured into Vietnam, they brought with them a demand for escape, for something to numb the horror of jungle warfare. By the mid-intelligence reports revealed a staggering truth. Over half of all heroin used by US soldiers in Vietnam could be traced back to the Golden Triangle. And the majority of that belonged to one man, Khun Sa, the Opium King. But Khun Sa understood something that separated him from every other drug lord in history. An empire built solely on fear eventually collapses. True power required legitimacy, and legitimacy required the consent of the governed. So he didn't just build a cartel, he built a kingdom. In the territory he controlled, which eventually stretched across vast swaths of Shan state, he established schools that taught Shan language and culture. He built hospitals that provided free medical care. He constructed roads that connected isolated villages to the outside world. To the Shan people living under his protection, Khun Sa wasn't a drug lord. He was a liberator. He was the man who gave their children education, their sick treatment, their communities hope. When Burmese government forces raided their villages, it was Khun Sa's soldiers who drove them back. But this benevolent facade masked a military machine that would make generals envious. By the 1980s, Khun Sa commanded the Mung Thai Army, a force of over 20,000 battle-hardened soldiers. This wasn't a ragtag militia anymore. This was a professional army with modern weapons, sophisticated communications, and ironclad discipline. His soldiers wore crisp jungle fatigues and carried AK-47s, M16s, and even anti-aircraft weapons. They swore loyalty not to Myanmar, not to any nation, but to their supreme commander, Khun Sa, the man who had given them purpose, pride, and prosperity. The Mung Thai army was larger and better equipped than the militaries of many UN member nations. They controlled territory the size of South Korea, with a population of nearly 500,000 people. In every meaningful sense, Khun Sa had created his own country, a narco-state that existed in the shadows of the international system. But perhaps Khun Sa's greatest weapon wasn't military, it was his understanding of image and perception. While other drug lords hid in bunkers, he invited foreign journalists to his mountain stronghold. He gave interviews, posed for photographs, and presented himself not as a criminal, but as a revolutionary leader fighting for his people's independence. When reporters asked about the drug trade, Khun Sa would spread his hands and smile. "I am fighting for the freedom of the Shan people," he would say. "If the world wants to end the opium trade, give us recognition. Give us legitimacy. Until then, we must survive by any means necessary." It was masterful propaganda. And it worked. By the late 1970s, Khun Sa had become too big to ignore. The Burmese government, embarrassed by this shadow state operating within their borders, launched massive military campaigns into Shan territory. But Khun Sa had spent decades preparing for exactly this moment. His army melted into the jungle like mist, using guerrilla tactics perfected over generations of mountain warfare. Government convoys were ambushed on narrow mountain roads. Forward bases were raided in pre-dawn attacks that left no survivors to tell the tale. When conventional tactics failed, the Burmese tried a different approach. They attempted to buy Khun Sa off. Corrupt officials offered him positions in the government, promises of autonomy, even roles in the official military. But Khun Sa understood that accepting would mean giving up his independence, his empire, his identity. He refused every offer. Thailand, too, tried to shut down his smuggling routes. The Thai military launched operations along the border, established checkpoints, and offered rewards for information about Khun Sa's movements. But his network had roots that ran deeper than any government operation could reach. Corrupt Thai officials found their bank accounts mysteriously fuller after encounters with Khun Sa's representatives. Border guards discovered that looking the other way was far more profitable than doing their jobs. Even honest officials found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by an organization that had been perfecting the art of evasion for decades. And then came the ultimate challenge: the United States of America. By 1979, the D had declared Khun Sa the world's most wanted drug trafficker. The man they called the Pablo Escobar of Asia was now public enemy number one for the world's most powerful nation. The Americans brought resources that dwarfed anything Khun Sa had faced before. Satellite surveillance tracked his movements. Electronic eavesdropping intercepted his communications. Special operations forces were deployed to train local militaries in counter-narcotics warfare. But instead of running and hiding like every other kingpin would have done, Khun Sa did something unprecedented. He went public. He gave interviews to international media, invited camera crews to his headquarters, and made an offer that stunned the world. In 1988, sitting calmly in his jungle compound while DEA agents searched for him across 3 countries, Khun Sa made a proposal that would have been laughable from anyone else. He would sell his entire opium empire to the United States government for $50 million. "I control 70% of the world's heroin supply," he told startled reporters. "If America truly wants to end the drug trade, they should negotiate with me. Give my people recognition as an independent state, and I will destroy every poppy field, every laboratory, every smuggling route under my control." It wasn't just bravado. Intelligence analysts confirmed that Khun Sa probably could deliver on his promise. But Washington's response was swift and unambiguous. The United States does not negotiate with terrorists or drug dealers. The rejection of his offer marked the beginning of the most intensive manhunt in the history of the war on drugs. The D coordinated with the CIA, Thai intelligence, Burmese informants, and anyone else willing to help bring down the Opium King. Military operations intensified. Jungle laboratories were bombed from the air. Supply convoys were targeted by special forces. Key lieutenants were captured or killed. The net was closing around Khun Sa's empire. But, like a hydra from Greek mythology, every head they cut off seemed to grow back stronger. Every laboratory destroyed was replaced by 2 new ones. Every smuggling route interdicted was replaced by 3 alternate paths. Every captured lieutenant was replaced by 2 eager recruits. And here's where the story takes a darker turn, one that investigators are still unraveling decades later. Rumors began to circulate that Khun Sa's empire was so vast, so deeply embedded in the region's power structures, that it couldn't operate without protection from the very agencies trying to destroy it. During the Cold War, the CIA had a complex relationship with anti-communist forces throughout Southeast Asia. Some of these groups, fighting against Soviet-backed governments, needed funding for their operations. And in a region where legitimate commerce was limited, opium money was often the only money available. Declassified documents would later reveal that some CIA-backed groups did indeed turn a blind eye to drug trafficking. As long as the profits funded anti-communist activities, whether this protection extended to Khun Sa himself remains a matter of heated debate among historians and investigators. What's undeniable is that despite being the world's most wanted man, despite having a $2 million bounty on his head, despite facing the combined resources of multiple governments, Khun Sa continued to operate with remarkable impunity. He gave interviews to major television networks. He met with foreign diplomats. He even hosted Western journalists at lavish dinners in his mountain compound, serving expensive wine while discussing philosophy and politics as if he were a legitimate head of state rather than a fugitive drug lord. The message was clear. Khun Sa wasn't just a criminal running from justice. He was a power unto himself, operating by his own rules in a world where traditional concepts of sovereignty and law enforcement simply didn't apply. By the early 1990s, the world was changing around Khun Sa in ways that even his strategic mind couldn't fully control. The Cold War was over, eliminating the geopolitical complexities that had provided him with protection. China was rising as a regional power, bringing pressure on Myanmar to clean up its border regions. More importantly, his own empire was beginning to show cracks. Rival Shan groups challenged his authority. Some of his most trusted lieutenants began cutting their own deals with government forces. The next generation of traffickers, dealing in methamphetamines and synthetic drugs, saw his opium empire as antiquated. The Burmese military junta, facing increasing international pressure over the drug trade, decided they needed a dramatic gesture to prove their commitment to fighting narcotics. But instead of launching another doomed military campaign, they chose a different approach: negotiation. On January 5, 1996, the world woke up to shocking news. Khun Sa, the man who had defied governments and law enforcement agencies for over 4 decades, had surrendered. But this wasn't the dramatic capture that Hollywood movies are made of. There were no handcuffs, no perp walks, no dramatic standoffs. Instead, Khun Sa simply walked out of his mountain stronghold, got into a government car, and disappeared into a new life as a protected witness. The deal was simple and shocking in its generosity. Khun Sa would retire to Yangon, Myanmar's capital, where he would live under government protection. In exchange, he would officially dissolve the Mung Thai army and publicly renounce drug trafficking. He was never extradited to face charges in Thailand or the United States. He was never tried for the countless deaths his heroin had caused worldwide. He was never held accountable for the wars, the corruption, the decades of violence that had made him rich beyond imagination. The Opium King, who had poisoned a generation and built an empire on suffering, would spend his final years as a quiet businessman in Myanmar's capital, protected by the same government that had once tried to destroy him. Khun Sa died in 2007 of natural causes, in his own bed, surrounded by family. He was 73 years old and had never spent a single day in prison for his crimes. But his death didn't end the story of the Golden Triangle. If anything, it marked the beginning of a new and even more dangerous chapter. The networks he built, the routes he established, the corruption he fostered, all of it survived his passing. Today, the Golden Triangle remains one of the world's primary sources of illegal drugs. But where Khun Sa once ruled over opium fields, methamphetamine laboratories now operate around the clock. Where his heroin once flowed along mountain paths, synthetic drugs now move through sophisticated international networks. The production numbers are staggering. The Golden Triangle now produces more methamphetamine than the rest of the world combined. The profits dwarf even Khun Sa's opium empire, generating an estimated $30 billion annually. Law enforcement agencies across Asia and beyond continue to battle an enemy that Khun Sa helped create. A criminal ecosystem so deeply embedded in the region's economy and politics that it may be impossible to eliminate. some still see Khun Sa as a Robin Hood figure, a man who used drug money to build schools and hospitals for his people. Others remember him as a global villain whose heroin destroyed countless lives across multiple continents. But perhaps the most accurate description is simpler and more chilling. Khun Sa was a man who recognized that in a world of weak states and strong networks, the greatest power belonged not to governments, but to those who could build and control those networks. He called himself a revolutionary. The world called him a drug lord. But in the end, Khun Sa was something far more significant. The architect of modern transnational organized crime. And in the mountains of the Golden Triangle, where the borders blur and the law fades into mist, his ghost still haunts the poppy fields and the laboratory caves, a reminder that some empires outlive their emperors.
Subscribe for more stories that make you question everything.